If you guys are still watching, it must mean that you advance to round 2 of your fantasy playoffs. Good luck this week. I'm going to help you set your fantasy football lineups, going through everything that you need to know. It's week 16 by now. You guys know what we're doing around here. Over-unders, implied totals, who has the best matchups, advanced data points, all that good stuff to help you guys set your fantasy football lineups. Take out a pen, take out a piece of paper. Let's get through your start-sit decisions together. Now let's get into it. All right, so let's kick off the Week 16 matchups that matter with the top over-unders on the slate. As I talked about in last week's video, because we're in the fantasy playoffs, I'm not doing top fives and bottom fives anymore. I want to make sure that I'm servicing all of you guys out there. So these are all the games, all the over-unders that you guys can see on the screen. We're not looking like a complete fantasy bonanza this week. Last week's over-unders were a little bit higher, but we do have a couple big ones here. The Dolphins and Cowboys with a 50-point over-under. That's the only game above 50. 49ers, Ravens, Vikings, Lions, Rams, Saints tonight on Thursday Night Football. And then some of those other games there above 45 points. So a couple good games to choose from. Some of these games, though, you want to stay away from. The Broncos, Patriots at a sub 35-point over-under. Steelers, Bengals, Jets, Commanders, Panthers, and Packers, all of those over-unders under 40 points. So again, piece of paper and a pen, jot down your start-sit decisions and who has what going in their favor. Ideally, we want high-scoring game environments, high-scoring matchups, good matchups, and all that stuff in between. So implied point totals, specifically which teams are projected to score the most points according to Vegas. The dominant offenses, as you might expect, the Bills, the Eagles, the 49ers, the Dolphins, the Chiefs, the Lions, the Rams, and the Cowboys, all implied for over 24 points according to Vegas this week. So, of course, fire up your Bills, your Eagles, and et cetera there. You want to fire up all those players. Sneaky good spots, though. I want to highlight a couple for lesser offenses. The Chicago Bears are implied for 23.5 points. Not typically a team implied for a lot of points. So Justin Fields, DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, these type of dudes should be in a good spot this week. Atlanta Falcons, Minnesota Vikings, and Seattle Seahawks all implied for 22 or more points. So keep that in mind. You don't typically see these guys implied for a lot of points, and they are. So definitely presents a decent window of opportunity there. And make sure to steer clear of the Patriots, of the Giants, of the Raiders, the Chargers, Panthers, Commanders, among others. These teams are not must-start players unless you got Devontae Adams or Saquon Barkley from these teams. Leave most of those players on your bench because they are not implied for a lot of points according to Vegas, and they are our best barometer for our fantasy football start-sit decisions in terms of high-scoring game environments. So where the sharps are betting, these also give us an insight to what lines might be set too low or too high. The sharp money is something that we definitely want to follow, especially when we see games that they're fading for fantasy purposes or games that they're absolutely hammering for fantasy purposes. The Broncos, Patriots, Jets, Commanders, Steelers, Bengals, not checking the boxes that we want. Already low point totals, as you can see, under 40 points, and the steam is on the under. So it looks like the sharps agree with the odds makers there, thinking that those games are not expected to be very high-scoring games. So if you have players in those games that are not must-start options, maybe leave them on your bench. Dolphins, Cowboys, Vikings, Lions, potentially looking like trap games according to the sharps here. A lot of the money is on the under in those games, although that could be an indictment of one team or the other, not necessarily over both teams, so keep that in mind. And then when we have great fantasy spots here for the sharps on the overs, with the 49ers, Ravens, the Chargers, Bills, the Rams, Saints tonight, and the Colts, Falcons. All of these games all have relatively high totals to begin with, and it appears that the sharps like the overs in those games. So if you have 49ers, if you have Ravens, Chargers, Bills, Rams, Saints, Colts, and Falcons players, you probably want to keep those guys into your lineup. The sharps like them to go even higher than their already high point totals. Make sure to target those games with your start-sit decisions when possible. So getting into the advanced data points, so these are things like fast pace of play and, offensive and defensive DVOA advantages and disadvantages. You guys can see all of the games on the screen here. These are the fastest paced games at the top and the slowest paced games at the bottom. We got some trifectas on the screen here where you guys can see a trifecta basically is when you have a high over-under game, a fast-paced game, and the sharps are taking the over in it. The Colts-Falcons is one of our trifectas this week. Fast-paced, sharps on the over, and already a 44.5-point total. The Texans and Bills has just a 40-point total, but it is expected to be very fast, and the sharps are on the over in that one, so that one could be a sneaky high-scoring environment. And then we also have another trifecta with the Chargers and the Bills. Also a trifecta there, high scoring game environment, high pace of play, and the sharps on the over. And then another 2 trifectas with the Rams, Saints, and the Buccaneers and Jaguars. So if you are looking for, start sit flex decisions or something like that, and you got a player in one of those games, you're probably going to want to put them into your lineup because those trifecta decisions are the ones that we definitely want. And then we have the offensive DVOA matchups versus the defensive DVOA matchups. So these are things like the team on the left side of the column there. That's the offense that we're looking at. Then the second from left column is their opponent, and that's their defense that we're looking at. Ideally, we want the offense to have an advantage because that means more fantasy production. The biggest advantage by a country mile on the week this week is the Bills offense versus the Chargers defense. So definitely, if you got any Buffalo Bills, you throw them into your lineup. That includes, of course, Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen, and James Cook, but also maybe if you guys are digging a little bit deeper this week, Dalton Kincaid and Gabriel Davis make for good starts. The 49ers, the Eagles, the Dolphins, the Chiefs, the Cowboys, and the Rams, all of these offenses are expected very good offenses, ergo they're going to have good advantages against most defenses that they go up against, so definitely start those players. But I'd also like to draw your attention to the Packers, the Bears, the Seahawks, and the Colts offenses, who are not notoriously considered elite offenses, but they do have good spots this week to potentially punch above their weight classes. So the Bears specifically showing up on multiple occasions for that reason, as well as the Indianapolis Colts. So you're going to want to fire up those players if you can. Steer clear of the Commanders, the Giants, the Texans, the Raiders, the Jets, and the Panthers if you can help it as well. Now we get into the shadow coverage matchups. So specifically, those of you guys that are looking for wide receiver start-sit decisions, these could help influence you one way or another. Some of the hardest matchups here in shadow coverage or just overall matchup charts. In general here, we have the T. Higgins versus Joey Porter matchup. It has already been announced that Jamar Chase will be ruled out for this game, so T. Higgins will be operating as the number 1 receiver for the Bengals, and he is going to see their shadow coverage corner, Joey Porter Jr., so you got to downgrade expectations a little bit for T. Higgins, but probably still in your lineup with Chase out. Devontae Adams versus L'Jarius Sneed, again, probably still in your lineup, but downgrade expectations. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, probably still in your lineup, but downgrade expectations from a matchup standpoint, but like I said, Saints and Rams, a very high-scoring game environment, so those guys are definitely in my lineup. Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs, if Pittman is healthy, are in a pretty tough spot against A.J. Terrell and Mike Hughes, respectively. If Pittman is out, that presents a good opportunity for Josh Downs to be the number 1, and he's also in a fast-paced, high-scoring game environment. And then the Commanders wide receivers versus the Jets cornerbacks, not a good game environment, in addition to the fact that Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel and Jahan Dotson are going to have to go up against the Jets secondary, which is very strong. The easiest matchup on the field there is probably Curtis Samuel versus Michael Carter, but not a good matchup and not a good game environment overall for those players. Keep that in mind when you're setting your lineups. And then we have the yellow matchups. So these are kind of like in the middle somewhere. Don't upgrade, don't downgrade these guys. Justin Jefferson versus Cam Sutton. Technically a shadow matchup for him against the Detroit Lions, but I have no doubt in my mind he's going to probably still be just fine because he's Justin Jefferson and because Cam Sutton doesn't really scare me. Deontay Johnson and George Pickens going up against the Bengals corners. They actually do deploy, left side, right side shadow coverage. So Deontay and Pickens should see those 2 corners respectively. But again, not an overly daunting matchup for them. And then some of the matchup upgrades. So these are guys that we want to see have big performances because they're in good matchups. Garrett Wilson versus Kendall Fuller, that is expected to be a really good one on the other side of the ball there for that Commanders and Jets game. Not a high-scoring game environment, but the Commanders are the stone worst defense in the league versus wide receivers in general, but specifically number 1 wide receivers, which we know Garrett Wilson is. Giants wide receivers against the Eagles corners, probably wouldn't mess with Wandale or Jalen Hyatt or anybody like that, but if you're completely desperate, you could do worse. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, both in good matchups against the Jags secondary. DJ Moore versus Starling Thomas, also very, very good matchup for DJ Moore and the Chicago Bears. Rashee Rice versus Nate Hobbs, primarily out of the slot for the Raiders. There is a great matchup. And then Jaden Reed versus Troy Hill. Notoriously, the Panthers are quite good against wide receivers, but they have struggled against slot receivers. And Jaden Reed versus Troy Hill is a matchup that you want to follow there. Hence why you can see their DVOA versus opposing number 1s. Most teams are moving their number 1s into the slot against the Carolina Panthers, and that's how they're getting home. And I think Jaden Reed could be that type of dude this week. So keep that in mind with your start-sit decisions. Now let's get into the matchups for quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, defense, and kicker. Into the quarterback position, we have elite quarterbacks in great spots this week. We got Josh Allen set to completely slap his strudel up and down the SoFi Stadium. I think that the Bills are going to annihilate the Chargers, at least on offense. Absolutely elite spot for Justin Fields as well against the Arizona Cardinals, who are absolutely bleeding fantasy points. So those two guys, if you got them, feel pretty good about them. Further down on the list, we have Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, and Jalen Hurts, who are all in pretty good spots themselves, but not quite to the level of Josh Allen and Justin Fields. Streaming quarterback options, in case you guys suffered some injuries or whatever, the premier streaming quarterback this week, if you can get him, is Trevor Lawrence against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They have not been good against opposing quarterbacks or wide receivers, and Trevor Lawrence has been up and down, plus injured, so he might actually be available in your league. But if he's not available, I don't think that Geno Smith, Gardner Minshew, Joe Flacco, or Will Levis are bad options. So those are my favorite streamers ranked in order. If you guys are wondering who I would start over who, it would be Geno, then Minshew, then Flacco, then Levis, but Lawrence is the number one streaming quarterback for me. Tough spots for Brock Purdy, for Lamar Jackson, for Tua Tagovailoa, Patrick Mahomes, and Matthew Stafford. But all of those guys are still inside my top 10 quarterbacks, so you're still probably starting them. Unless you had like maybe Trevor Lawrence, I'd probably start him over Tua and maybe Stafford as well. But for the most part, those guys are still in your lineup. And then find other options if you guys are trying to rely on like Sam Howell, Jake Browning, especially without Jamar Chase, or Jared Goff this week. Not good spots for those guys. So I'd probably look elsewhere to some of those streamers. And then the tough one to decipher is CJ Stroud, because CJ Stroud could be back from a concussion this week, probably will be back from a concussion this week, and he might have Nico Collins as well. So good player, obviously, CJ Stroud and Nico Collins, but I tend to lean towards sitting them against the Cleveland Browns, mainly CJ Stroud. Nico Collins, you're probably going to have to play. Running back matchups, we have elite spots for some of the studs like James Cook, Breece Hall, Isaiah Pacheco if he's a go, Bijan Robinson, even though Arthur Smith is going to probably break our hearts again, Jonathan Taylor, assuming he's back, which it sounds like he will be. Those running backs that I just named, all in very, very promising spots here this week. And then more like fringe RB2 options. So if you guys are deciding between a guy that I'm about to name, these guys are all in really good spots to start this week off very hot for you. James Conner, Brian Robinson, assuming he's healthy, Antonio Gibson if he's not, Jerome Ford, Chuba Hubbard, and Javonte Williams. My favorite of that group is probably Chuba Hubbard, but I will have my RB rankings video out on Friday or Saturday morning, probably Friday night. Tough spots for Christian McCaffrey, Travis Etienne, Saquon Barkley, Kyron Williams, Raheem Mostert, and Devon Achane, Alvin Kamara, Tony Pollard, Josh Jacobs, and the Lions running backs. You're still probably starting all of these players, but definitely temper expectations. A lot of running backs in tougher matchups this week than we saw in last week's Matchups That Matter video. Outright sit some of these guys too. If you guys don't have better options, leave Devin Singletary on your bench. Leave Jalen Warren and Najee Harris on your bench if you can help it. Gus Edwards on your bench if you can help it. Ty Chandler on your bench if you can help it. I would say most of you guys probably have to start these dudes if you're in a deeper league, but if you do have better wide receiver options or other running back options, I would say you can absolutely bench the names that I just said. So wide receiver matchups, I kind of already went through most of these in the wide receiver cornerback charts, but great matchups for Garrett Wilson, for the Seahawks wide receivers, particularly DK Metcalf. Stephon Diggs, get right game incoming, in my opinion, against the Chargers. Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison in really good spots, as I outlined. Calvin Ridley, CeeDee Lamb, the Steelers wide receivers, and Amon-Ra St. Brown all set up for big games this week. And then some pretty sneaky good fringe plays if you guys are deciding between anybody that I'm naming. All of these guys are in really good matchups. Tyler Lockett and JSN, Gabriel Davis, Zay Jones, Brandon Cooks, George Pickens, Chris Godwin, Adam Thielen, and Drake London. All pretty good options this week if you are in need of a flex play or a wide receiver 3 or whatever the case is. Temper expectations for guys like Nico Collins, Terry McLaurin, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, and Michael Pittman Jr. if he's back, as well as the Rams wide receivers, although you're still probably starting all of these guys as top 24 options. All of those guys probably in your lineup, minus maybe Terry McLaurin if you have better options, because the Jets are pretty strong against wide receivers and that game environment is not great. Outright sit some of these like fringe starters as well. Noah Brown if Nico Collins is back, Josh Downs if Michael Pittman's back, although both of those guys are starters if the other guy is out. Any wide receivers not named Jaden Reed on the Packers I'm not really interested in. Maybe Jacoby Myers, Marquise Brown, and Tyler Boyd as well. I don't think any of those guys need to be in your lineup given the matchups that they have. Moving on to the tight end position, we have Dalton Kincaid, Jake Ferguson, Trey McBride, David Njoku, Travis Kelce, and TJ Hawkinson. These guys are all tight ends I would consider every week starters, all of them in very good matchups. So if you have those guys, feel pretty good about them. If you guys are looking to stream a tight end because you've maybe lost one to injury or whatever, the best streaming option this week is Pat Freiermuth. I know the Steelers' offense isn't very good, but Freiermuth has the best matchup of any tight end this week against the Cincinnati Bengals, who bleed fantasy production to this position. Also a decent spot to stream Hunter Henry, to stream Kyle Pitts, Darren Waller, and Cade Otton. So those are some of my favorite streamers of the week. Temper expectations for some of these dudes as well, especially Dallas Goedert, Isaiah Likely, and Dalton Schultz. They have pretty tough matchups, and they're usually on that fringe every week starter range. But if you have another option, like say a Dalton Kincaid or a Jake Ferguson, I would probably steer clear of Goddard, Likely, and Schultz, and then probably don't mess with Michael Mayer, Tucker Kraft, or Cole Kmet. Although Tucker Kraft and Cole Kmet have good game environments, just tough matchups, so I actually don't mind those guys, but keep in mind that their matchups are pretty tough. Now we move on finally to the DST and kicker talk. Made some good calls last week on the Raiders defense and the Saints defense. Both of those defenses did very well. This week, I really love the Eagles defense going up against the Giants and Tommy DeVito. Love the Jets defense going up against Sam Howell. Takes a lot of sacks, turns the ball over. Denver Broncos defense at home versus Bailey Zappi and the Patriots. Also a very good option. Packers defense versus the Panthers and Bryce Young, a very good option. So those are my favorite streaming defenses. Very unique week for defenses as well, because a lot of the top defenses have horrible matchups, right? You got the Ravens defense going up against the 49ers. You got the Cowboys defense going up against the Dolphins. I would probably sit those defenses. I am not loyal to defense whatsoever. So if you have a good real life and fantasy defense going up against a very good offense, probably steer clear of that. Don't mess with them if you can help it. Kicker talk. I mean, again, I don't really know a whole lot about kickers. Haven't played in a kicker league since like 2017. But the Colts, Falcons, Lions, Broncos, Rams, and Saints kickers are all decent streaming options if you need one this week. All of those guys are, in good game environments and such else. So if you guys enjoyed this video, if you got some value from it, if I helped you set your lineup, hit the like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new around here. Comment down below any start sits. I'll try and get to as many as I possibly can. This time I will get to a lot more start sits. We will be live on Saturday afternoon. We will not be live Sunday morning before kickoff because it's Christmas Eve and we got family stuff to do. So our big morning live stream will actually become before the 4:30 kickoff on Saturday. So we'll do like a 1.5 hour, 2 hour live stream then. So if you have start sit questions at that point in time, bring those to the table. I will leave my weekly rankings down below for free. All the matchup charts and information, because it's week 16 and week 17. I want to make sure that you guys don't have to, sign up for the site to get this information. I want to make sure it's widely available to help you guys win your fantasy football matchup. So I will link that down below in the pinned comment if you're interested. But with that being said, peace out and we'll talk to you soon.